What's up everybody? So in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit more about classification of biodiversity, specifically the plant phylums, okay? Everything you need to know about plant phylums. So we know our Earth has so many organisms, right? And we can organize them according to this, from domain all the way down to species, from general to specific, right? So all organisms can go under three basic domains: archaea, eubacteria, and eukarya. Now we're only going to go into eukarya today. So if we go into eukarya, we know all the organisms that are grouped under eukarya can be further divided into some kingdoms. So what are those kingdoms? Those kingdoms include plant, animal, fungi, and protista. Now obviously all of these can be further divided into some phylums, but we're only going to look at the plant, okay? We're only going to look at what the plant can be divided into. So if we look at this plant kingdom and we see what it can be divided into, we notice it can be divided into four important phylums. There are more phylums for the plant, but you only need to care about these four for the IB, okay? So look at these names. They're insane. Bryophyta, Filicinophyta, Coniferophyta, Angiospermophyta. You're going to take some time. I took some time. I had to write these on my when I was doing IB biology. I had to write them on my mirror and my bathroom mirror and look at them every day because they just didn't seem to want to get into my head. Now, first of all, notice how they all have the word, the section phyta in common. Phyta, right? Phyta means plant, okay? And that makes sense because we're looking at the plant kingdom. The plant phylums. So bryo, we're going to talk about the first one first, then we'll go on to the rest, okay? So let's quickly hide these, okay? Because we don't care about them now. We care about the Bryophyta first. Bryo means moss, and phyta means plant. So this category includes very simple plants, one of which includes moss. Moss, what is moss? So let's look at this magic box. So moss is this plant here, right? It's not really like a tree or a big kind of plant. They simply grow on the floor sort of without going high, right? Have you seen these before? I don't know if you have, but yeah, it's a very, very simple plant. So all organisms under the kingdom, the phylum of Bryophyta are very, very simple plants. And I'll show you what characteristics they have in common. Let's get to them. Okay, so here we go. Bryophyta. What characteristics do they have in common? So here I have the moss, okay? So first of all, they are all very small. This makes sense because when you look at this plant and you've seen them before, they don't grow high at all. They're like 1 centimeter. That's it. So they're very small. That's thing one you need to know about Bryophyta, one of the categories of all plants. The second is it has very simple leaves. And so if you look at them, if you look really closely with your eyes, they'll have very tiny, very simple leaves. They don't have big, complicated leaves like all other plants. So we call them simple leaves. Next, they have no roots at all, none. Most of the plants that you have to pull out in your garden, if you have to do that sometimes during gardening, you'll notice they have these long, solid, thick roots. These don't have that. They have things that look like roots, but they're not roots. They're made from a different material. They're far thinner, and they're more like hair. But they have the same function as roots, okay? And they're called rhizoids, okay? So no roots, but they have rhizoids. They also don't have a stem. And this makes sense because I said these plants are super short. They don't grow up. And we know the only purpose of the stem, or the main purpose of the stem, is to help a plant be stable when it's standing up. But these don't grow up, so they don't need a stem, okay? So that's one other important thing about Bryophyta. Now next, no vascular system or no cuticle. Okay, so if you're taking HL biology, you'll learn a lot about the vascular system in plant biology, topic 9. But if you're not, I'm just going to quickly clarify something. So you know how humans have like arteries and veins and vessels like that in our body that helps carry our blood around to all our cells so that we can get all the nutrients we need and survive? A plant also has that, and we call this the vascular system. Okay, so it's like little pipes in a plant, and it helps bring water and nutrients to all the cells of the plant. Now, a Bryophyta doesn't have that. Why? Because a vascular system is only useful for plants that are tall, because we know the nutrients come from the soil. So a tall plant will need the nutrients to be sucked up from the soil and brought all the way to the top of the plant. But since these plants are short, they can just absorb water from the air. They don't need water to be sucked up from the soil all the way to the top of the plant because there is no top of the plant. The whole plant is even and short everywhere, right? Kind of like grass. So they don't have a vascular system, okay? Now, they also don't have a cuticle. A cuticle is a thin layer on top of a leaf that helps protect it from harsh conditions and helps to prevent water from leaving the leaf. So essentially, it's useful to conserve water so that the plant doesn't dehydrate. Now, this Bryophyta doesn't have that. Why? Again, because this plant cannot survive in harsh conditions because it's unable to have this cuticle so that it can conserve water. So it needs to survive in moist conditions. It survives well in a place where the air is humid and the water is plenty. Okay, because without a cuticle, it can't survive in dry conditions. Okay, so that's another important thing. Second last thing, they reproduce by spores. So another key word here, spores. Spores is basically, in Bryophyta, if we look here, you can see spores is this thing located, a filament-like thing located on the top of the plant, the highest peak. It's hanging over the plant. And this is basically the genetic information of the plant. It's how the plant, it's basically like pollen. Essentially, it's not pollen, but it's essentially like pollen. It's something that's going to break off from the plant and spread somewhere else to help form a new plant. So it has the DNA here to help make a new plant, to help spread the DNA of the plant so that it can reproduce somewhere else. Okay, so that's what spores are. These little seed-like things, sort of, but they're not seeds. They're spores. Okay, an example is mosses. Okay, that's so always know an example. It's always good to know the key example. The key example for the IB is mosses. So that's it. That's all you need to know about the first category of how plants can be grouped, and that's Bryophyta. So here I have it again. I just didn't want to put it here because it's not as interesting as using this image here. Okay, this image makes it much more clear. So now let's move on to the next one, Filicinophyta. Okay, so Filicinophyta start getting a little bit more complicated than Bryophyta because Bryophyta are really, really simple plants. Filicinophyta, again, phyta meaning plants, look like this. And these you've probably seen in many places, right? And oh yeah, by the way, I forgot to show you this. In general, the longer the name gets, the more complicated the plant is. So Bryophyta is the shortest name, so it is the most simple plant, okay? As in general true. Okay, so the key example of what is under this group, the Filicinophyta, is ferns. These are called ferns, okay? You've probably seen these in a bunch of places. Ferns. They're slightly more complicated plants, right? And if you don't remember what goes under Filicinophyta, just remember F Filicinophyta for ferns, okay? You need to know this key example. So let's go in and look at what makes this category unique compared to the other one, the Bryophytas. So first of all, they're slightly bigger, right? That's one obvious one. Bryophyta was smaller. These are bigger. Secondly, they have proper leaves. Their leaves are much bigger and they're very pointy. Very pointy. We call that pinnate. Pinnate, right? Kind of like this, pointy. And another thing is, they actually have roots. So right, the Bryophyta didn't have any form of roots. They had rhizoids. But these actually have roots. They have roots. But again, remember, they have the same function. They help suck up nutrients, help stabilize the plant inside the soil, all of these things. And they also have a stem, because this plant actually grows upwards. And this stem is going to help make the plant be stable as it's growing upwards. It has a vascular system. And again, why? Because this vascular system is going to be inside the stem, helping carry water from the soil all the way to the top of the plant, because this plant can actually grow upwards against gravity. Hence, it's going to need this vascular system to ensure that all the nutrients can be carried upwards to the top of the plant. Okay? That was unlike the Bryophyta. Now, they also reproduce by spores. Remember, in this one, we couldn't see the spores. I couldn't show you, we couldn't see it so clearly, right? Because they're not everywhere. They're really at the top here by the plant. They hang here as a filament at the top of the plant. Remember, that's a key thing. Whereas in the Filicinophytas, they are on the leaves. Look here. They're on the leaves, these little circle-like things, these spores, right? And they will pretty much pop off and move somewhere else to help create a new plant, kind of like a seed, okay? But we call it a spore, not a seed. And here is another example here we can see. They are very, very tiny here on the leaf, very, very tiny, but we can't actually see them. Unlike here, where we could not see them. You could not see them on the leaves. We could only see them here at the top. Okay. Last thing, an example, again, ferns. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, here I also zoomed in to show the spores. They're on the leaves, unlike the Bryophytas. Okay, so second last one. We're almost there, people. Coniferophyta. Okay, these are getting even more complicated. Remember, I said the longer the name, or the more we go from left to right, we're going to get more complicated. So what is Coniferophyta? They essentially represent Christmas trees. Big trees, okay, that have conifers on them. I mean, cones on them. Let me show you what I mean. So here we have like a Coniferophyta, okay? It's a big tree. They can go very big. Now, what makes them under this category of Coniferophyta is that they have cones, okay? Remember these? Have you seen these, right? These are cones, okay? All of this tree will have this. That is unique compared to the other ones we looked at, the Bryophyta and Filicinophyta. They didn't have this, whereas this type of plant actually has this. So let's look at some characteristics. Oh yeah, let me move back here. Let me reveal it here so it's just clear as well. Okay, so now these are the biggest. Bryophyta was the smallest, Filicinophyta got bigger, and these are a full-on tree. They're the biggest, okay? Secondly, they have leaves, normal leaves, just like the Filicinophyta. They have also roots and a stem. This makes sense, right? And since they're growing up like this, away from the soil, unlike Bryophyta, they're going to need a vascular system to get all those nutrients from the roots all the way up through these vascular system to supply the entire plant. Secondly, instead of reproducing by spores, like the Filicinophyta and the Bryophyta did, these are going to reproduce by seeds. Okay, this we actually get, seeds. And these seeds are located here in the cones, okay, in the cones. So when these break open, the seeds will be released and they can create a new tree, okay? In some cases, if these conifers produce flowers, these Coniferophytas produce flowers, they can reproduce also by pollen, right? Because flowers have pollen. They have very needle-like leaves, notice, needle-like leaves. And this is important because we know these sometimes need to survive in pretty harsh conditions with very little water. So these needle-like leaves reduce the surface area, making less space for water to be able to get lost, right? Because it's not such a big leaf. If the leaf is really big, it has a lot of space to lose water from. So because they're so sharp and so thin, they prevent water loss. So these can survive in more harsh conditions. Okay, last one here, an example, conifers. Any kind of tree that has a cone. Okay, now we move on to the last one. Oh yeah, let me reveal here again some stuff. Okay, final one, guys. You managed to make it through. So Angiospermophyta. Okay, so these are all flowering plants. All flowering plants. Let me show you. All of them. Every single plant that can make a flower, we call Angiospermophyta. So let's look at some key details. So first of all, they have variable size. So all of these, I said, we went from small to biggest. These can have variable sizes. Some plants have massive. Some plants are massive and they can have flowers. Some are really tiny, like these that have flowers. Okay, so they have varying sizes. It's not like not common size. Now they also can have leaves. We can see here they have some leaves. They also have a root and a stem, again, to bring water up to the rest of the flower and the plant and to stabilize the plant. They also have a vascular system, again, for the same reason. Now lastly, they are unique because they can reproduce with a fruit, right? Most plants that have flowers also make a fruit. So in this case, we can see here's a peach. It can be a strawberry, an apple, whatever, because those have seeds inside, right? That can get, once they get dispersed, they can create a new plant. But they can also reproduce with a nut or pollen, right? The flower may have some pollen. So any of these mechanisms is possible. So they don't use spores, unlike Bryophyta and Filicinophyta. An example is flowering plants. Okay, so basically, here I have everything that we talked about in table form. If you know this, you are 100% good and you nailed this topic, right? So I hope you understand this and I hope that everything made as much sense as possible. Notice that obviously there's many kind of plants that we didn't cover, and that's because those other plants, let me go back here, those other plants are probably gonna be in a different phylum. Okay, we only covered 4. There are some other ones that we don't know about. So if you're like sitting here being like, yeah, but what about apple tree? Okay, that's true. We didn't cover that, but that would be in another, maybe in another phylum. Okay, so don't think that this is it. This is just all that you need to care about. Okay.